Every year, millions of people go camping. Most return home with nothing more than photos, memories, and stories around a campfire. But not everyone. Some people return with something they can never explain. Some return with missing memories. Others return with strange scars that doctors cannot identify. And a few never return at all. Tonight, you're about to hear 3 terrifying camping encounters that have haunted investigators for years. These stories happen in different forests, different states, different years. The people involved had never met each other, yet every witness described the same impossible things. A deep humming sound that seemed to come from nowhere, a brilliant white light hovering silently above the trees, a strange feeling that someone, or something, was watching them from the darkness. At first, authorities dismissed every report. They blamed exhaustion, stress, wild animals, or overactive imaginations. But when investigators compared the reports, they discovered something impossible. Every campsite formed a giant triangle stretching hundreds of miles. Every witness lost between 3 and 6 hours of time. And every survivor drew the same strange symbol without remembering why. No one knows what really happened in those forests. But if these people are telling the truth, then something has been hiding in the wilderness for decades, watching, waiting, choosing who goes home and who doesn't. Our first story begins in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, where 4 best friends planned nothing more than a relaxing weekend under the stars. None of them knew it would become the last normal night of their lives. It was the summer of 2023. For college friends, Ethan, Mark, Daniel, and Ryan wanted to escape the noise of city life. After searching online, they found an isolated camping area deep inside the Colorado mountains. The place looked perfect. Crystal clear rivers, towering pine trees, no phone signal, no nearby towns, just endless wilderness. The local gas station owner looked at them strangely when they mentioned the location. He hesitated for a moment before saying quietly, "If you hear the forest go silent after midnight, don't stay outside." The friends laughed. They assumed he was trying to scare tourists with an old local legend. By sunset, they had pitched their tents beside a small lake. The evening felt peaceful. They cooked dinner, played music, and joked around the campfire. Everything seemed completely normal. Around midnight, Daniel noticed something strange. There aren't any crickets. Everyone stopped talking. He was right. The forest had become unnaturally quiet. No insects, no birds, not even the sound of wind moving through the trees. It felt wrong. Ryan tried to break the silence with a joke. Maybe even the animals went to sleep. Nobody laughed. Without warning, the campfire suddenly went out. Not slowly. It disappeared instantly, as if someone had switched it off. At exactly 2:13 a.m., Ethan looked toward the lake. High above the trees, a huge white light floated silently in the sky. It wasn't blinking like an airplane. It wasn't moving like a helicopter. It simply hovered, watching them. Mark immediately grabbed his camera. This is going viral. The moment he pressed the record button, the camera screen turned black, battery dead. But only seconds earlier had been fully charged. Then every flashlight around the campsite went out. One by one, the temperature dropped so quickly that their breath became visible. Daniel whispered, "I think we should leave." But before anyone could move, the mysterious light slowly descended toward the campsite. And that's when they realized they weren't looking at a light anymore. They were looking at a craft. Something enormous. Something that made absolutely no sound. The object stopped moving. It hovered only a few hundred feet above the campsite. No engine, no wind, no sound. It was as if gravity no longer affected it. The 4 friends stood frozen. None of them dared to speak. The smooth metallic surface of the craft reflected the moonlight, but there were no windows, no markings, and no visible lights except a faint blue glow around its edges. Ryan whispered, "What is that?" No one answered, because no one knew. Then, a deep humming vibration filled the air. It wasn't loud. It wasn't painful. It was something they felt inside their chests rather than heard with their ears. The ground began trembling. Tiny stones around a campfire started floating several inches above the ground. The lake became perfectly still. Not a single ripple moved across the water. Then, 3 thin beams of pale blue light descended from the craft. They didn't touch the ground. They stopped just above it, slowly scanning the campsite. Ethan reached for his backpack. Inside was a satellite phone they had brought for emergencies. He switched it on. The screen flashed once, then displayed only one message. No signal. A second later, the screen cracked by itself, without anyone touching it. Mark tried starting the truck parked nearby. Nothing. The engine was completely dead. Even the dashboard lights refused to turn on. Panic spread across the group. "We have to run," Daniel shouted, without waiting for the others. He sprinted toward the tree line. He had barely reached the first row of pine trees when he suddenly stopped. Not because he wanted to, because something was standing between the trees. At first, it looked like a shadow. Then it stepped forward. It was at least 8 feet tall. Its skin was pale gray. Its arms were unnaturally long. Its fingers reached almost to its knees. Its eyes, completely black. No pupils. No whites. Just endless darkness. Daniel couldn't breathe. The creature didn't walk. It glided silently across the forest floor. Then another figure appeared. And another. Within seconds, there were at least 6 of them standing between the trees, watching. None of them spoke. None of them blinked. They simply stared at the campers. Ryan slowly backed away. "We're surrounded." His voice shook so badly he could barely finish the sentence. The humming sound became stronger. Every one of the gray figures slowly raised its head toward the hovering craft. Then, all 6 looked back at the humans, at the exact same moment, as if they shared one mind. Suddenly, Ethan felt an unbearable pressure inside his head. He dropped to his knees. Memories flashed before his eyes. Bright white rooms, metal walls, strange symbols glowing in the darkness, voices speaking a language he had never heard. Then, everything went black. The next thing Ethan remembered, warm sunlight touched his face. He opened his eyes. The campfire had burned down to cold ash. The mysterious craft was gone. The gray beings had vanished. His friends were lying on the ground around him, slowly waking up in confusion. Mark looked at his watch. "That's impossible." Everyone checked their phones. It was 6:47 a.m. More than 4 hours had disappeared. None of them remembered what happened after seeing the creatures. Ryan looked around the campsite. Then his face turned pale. "Dee, do we do this?" The tents had been moved into a perfect circle. Their backpacks were stacked neatly in the center. None of them remembered moving anything. Then Daniel pointed toward the ground. Around the entire campsite, perfect circular burn marks had been scorched into the earth, as if something incredibly hot had hovered only inches above the grass. Near the lake, there was something else. A single footprint, nearly 16 inches long, only 3 toes, and far deeper than any human footprint could possibly be. Nobody spoke. They packed everything in silence. As they drove back toward civilization, the truck radio suddenly turned on by itself. A burst of static filled the cabin. Then, for less than 1 second, a distorted voice whispered, "We'll see you again." The signal vanished. The radio returned to normal. None of them ever went camping together again. But the real nightmare was only beginning. 2 months after the Colorado incident, the strange case quietly disappeared from the news. Authorities blamed exhaustion. The circular burn marks were dismissed as the result of an old campfire. The mysterious footprint. They claimed it belonged to a deformed bear. Most people accepted the explanation, except one man, former park ranger Michael Carter. For nearly 20 years, Michael had worked in national forests across the United States. He had seen mountain lions, black bears, even dangerous criminals hiding in the wilderness. But he'd also seen things he never reported, because no one would have believed him. When he heard about the Colorado case, he immediately recognized a pattern. The silence, the missing time, the strange lights. He had seen it before, exactly 12 years earlier. It happened during a father and son camping trip in northern Montana. David Miller wanted to spend one final weekend with his 12-year-old son, Ben, before the school year began. They reached the campsite just before sunset. The place was beautiful. A quiet lake surrounded by enormous pine trees. The nearest road was almost 20 miles away. Perfect for fishing. Perfect for camping. Perfectly isolated. An elderly fisherman packing his gear looked at David and quietly said, "If the lake starts glowing tonight, don't follow the light." David smiled politely. He assumed the old man enjoyed telling ghost stories. By nightfall, the campfire burned brightly. Ben roasted marshmallows while his father told stories about camping when he was young. For a while, everything felt normal. Then, shortly after 3 a.m., Ben woke up. Something was making a strange sound outside the tent. Not footsteps, not an animal. It sounded almost like someone whispering through water. Soft, slow, impossible to understand. He reached toward his father's sleeping bag. It was empty. "Dad!" No answer. Ben unzipped the tent. The cold night air rushed inside. His father stood nearly 100 feet away, at the edge of the lake, completely still. His arms hung at his sides. He wasn't moving. He wasn't speaking. He was simply staring across the water. "Dad!" Ben shouted again. Nothing, not even a small reaction. Then, the surface of the lake began glowing. A brilliant blue light slowly rose from beneath the water. It was a reflected moonlight. It was coming from deep below. The lake looked as if another world existed underneath it. Ben's heart pounded. Then he noticed movement. Tall figures, at least 7 feet high, thin, gray, standing silently around his father. They seemed to appear from the darkness itself. One of them slowly turned toward Ben. Its enormous black eyes reflected the blue light from the lake. Ben couldn't move. His entire body felt frozen. The humming sound returned, stronger than before. The trees began vibrating. The air itself seemed alive. One of the figures slowly lifted its hand, not toward David, toward Ben. The moment their eyes met, a blinding white flash swallowed everything. When Ben opened his eyes, bright sunlight filled the forest. Police officers surrounded the campsite. His tent was still there. The campfire had burned out hours earlier. A rescue helicopter circled overhead. A woman wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. "You're safe now." Ben looked around in confusion. "Where's my dad?" The officers looked at one another. No one answered immediately. Finally, one detective quietly spoke. "Ben, you've been missing for 3 days." The words made no sense. It was only one night. It can't be 3 days. But it was. Hundreds of volunteers had searched the forest. Drones, dogs, helicopters. There had been no sign of David Miller. Until that morning, he was found nearly 30 miles away, sitting alone on a rocky hillside. He had no food, no water, no injuries, just an empty expression on his face. When rescuers asked where he had been, he gave the same answer. Every time, "I can't remember." Doctors examined him for weeks. Physically, he was completely healthy. Mentally, something had changed. Every night, he woke screaming, drawing strange circular symbols on the walls. One evening, a psychologist asked him the same question again. "David, what happened at the lake?" David stared silently out the window for almost a full minute. Then, without looking at anyone, he whispered 6 chilling words. "They said they'll come back." The room fell silent. No one asked another question, because deep inside, everyone knew David truly believed what he had seen. And somewhere, hidden deep inside the forest, something might still be waiting. David Miller's case should have been the end of the investigation. Instead, it became the beginning, because 6 months later, former park ranger Michael Carter received an anonymous package. There was no return address, no name. Inside the envelope were only 3 things: a faded satellite image, a handwritten note, and an old cassette tape. The note contained just one sentence: "They're not visiting, they're monitoring." Michael immediately recognized the satellite image. It showed the 3 camping locations: Colorado, Montana, and a third forest in Oregon. When he connected the 3 points on the map, they formed a nearly perfect triangle stretching over 300 miles. Right in the center, there was a place with no official name, just endless forest. No roads, no campsites, no ranger stations. It looked like an empty piece of wilderness. But according to old government records, it wasn't empty. It had been closed to the public over 40 years earlier. Official reason: unstable ground conditions. Michael didn't believe it. After everything he had seen, he knew someone was hiding the truth. 2 weeks later, Michael drove toward the restricted forest alone. The gate at the entrance was rusted shut. A weathered warning sign read, "Area closed. No entry." The strange thing, there were fresh tire tracks leading inside. Someone had entered recently. Michael climbed over the gate and continued on foot. The deeper he walked, the quieter the forest became. No birds, no insects, no wind, only silence. Exactly the silence described by every witness. His heart began racing. Then the humming started. Low, steady, almost impossible to hear, yet impossible to ignore. He switched on his flashlight. It flickered, then went out. His GPS stopped working. His compass spun in circles. The same thing had happened in every previous case. After another mile, the trees suddenly ended. Michael stepped into a massive circular clearing. He froze. The ground was covered with hundreds of perfectly symmetrical burn marks. Some looked decades old. Others looked fresh. In the center stood an enormous black stone, at least 30 feet high. Its surface was covered with symbols unlike any language on Earth. As he moved closer, the humming became louder. The symbols began glowing faintly blue. Then, a brilliant white light illuminated the clearing. Michael slowly looked up. His breath caught in his throat. Above him hovered the largest craft he had ever seen. Not airplane-sized, not stadium-sized. It was nearly a mile wide. Its smooth metallic surface reflected the stars. There were no engines, no windows, no sound, just impossible silence. Then, several tall gray figures appeared around the stone, exactly like the witnesses had described. 7 feet tall, long arms, black eyes. But this time, they didn't approach. They simply watched him. One of them slowly raised its hand. Instantly, images flooded Michael's mind. He saw civilizations rising, then disappearing. He saw thousands of planets, countless forests, millions of humans, all being silently observed. The beings weren't invading Earth. They had been studying it for centuries, maybe longer. Then one final image appeared. Hundreds, no, thousands of identical craft hidden beneath Earth's oceans, inside mountains, and deep beneath untouched forests. Michael stumbled backward. No, this can't be real. The tallest figure finally spoke. Its voice wasn't heard with his ears. It echoed inside his mind. You were never alone. You were never the first. You will not be the last. The brilliant light became blinding. Everything disappeared. 3 days later, search teams found Michael Carter wandering along an empty highway, nearly 80 miles from the restricted forest. His backpack was gone. His camera had disappeared. His notebook was missing, but one object remained in his pocket, a small metallic sphere, perfectly smooth, no seams, no buttons. Scientists examined it for months. They couldn't identify the material. It wasn't steel. It wasn't titanium. It wasn't any known metal. Then, exactly 1 year later, without warning, the sphere activated. It projected a three-dimensional star map. One tiny blue point flashed repeatedly. Earth. Then, thousands of red lights slowly appeared around it. One by one, moving closer, the projection shut off. It has never activated again. Today, the official explanation remains unchanged. No aliens, no UFOs, no missing time, no evidence, just coincidence. But if you ask experienced campers about certain forests, some will quietly tell you the same thing. If the forest suddenly becomes silent, if every insect stops making noise, If you hear a low humming sound in the darkness, don't look toward the sky. And whatever you do, don't follow the light, because some people who did came back, but they were never quite the same again.